Have you ever felt like you were born into the wrong family? Like no matter what you did, you would never be enough? Today, I want to share with you a story about a woman named Sarah, whose journey from rejection to self acceptance will remind you that sometimes the family we choose becomes more precious than the one we were born into. This story takes place in the heart of Michigan, where family expectations run deep, and where one woman learned that her worth was never determined by those who should have loved her most. Sarah's story begins in the small town of Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she was born into what seemed like the perfect American family. Her father was a successful business owner, her mother was a respected member of the community, and her older brother David seemed destined for greatness. But from the moment Sarah took her first breath, something felt different. While her brother received praise for every small accomplishment, Sarah found herself constantly walking on eggshells, never quite measuring up to the impossible standards that seemed to be set just for her. Growing up, Sarah noticed how differently she was treated compared to David. When David brought home a B on his report card, it was celebrated with ice cream and congratulations. When Sarah brought home straight A's, she was told she needed to do better, to try harder, to be more like her brother. The message was clear from early on. Sarah was an afterthought in her own family, a secondary character in a story that revolved entirely around her brother's potential success. The differences became even more pronounced as Sarah entered her teenage years. While David was encouraged to pursue his interests in sports and leadership activities, Sarah was expected to help with household chores and maintain a perfect appearance at all times. When family friends visited, David's achievements were showcased proudly, while Sarah was often asked to serve refreshments or clean up, as if she were hired help rather than a beloved daughter. These moments carved deep wounds in Sarah's heart, wounds that would take years to heal. The most painful part of Sarah's childhood wasn't the obvious favoritism, though that hurt deeply. It was the subtle ways her parents made her feel invisible, unwanted, like a burden they had to bear. When she tried to share her dreams of becoming a teacher, her mother would sigh and say things like, "Well, someone has to do the ordinary jobs, I suppose." When she brought home awards from school, they were placed in a drawer rather than displayed on the mantel where David's trophies gleamed proudly. Sarah learned early that her accomplishments didn't matter, that she didn't matter, and that lesson would shape her entire worldview for decades to come. As Sarah moved through high school, she threw herself into her studies with a determination that surprised even her teachers. While her family dismissed her academic success as unimportant, Sarah secretly harbored dreams of college, of a life beyond the small town that seemed to define her worth by her family's opinion. She worked part-time jobs to save money for college applications, staying up late to study by the light of her desk lamp while the rest of the house slept peacefully, unaware of the young woman fighting for her future in the room down the hall. The day Sarah received her acceptance letter to Michigan State University with a full academic scholarship was a day she would never forget. She burst into the kitchen where her parents were drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, her acceptance letter trembling in her hands. Her father looked up briefly, grunted something that might have been congratulations, and returned to his paper. Her mother's response was even more crushing. "Well, I hope you're prepared for the real world to knock you down a few pegs. College isn't everything, you know?" In that moment, Sarah realized that she would never receive the validation she craved from the people who were supposed to love her most. College became Sarah's sanctuary, a place where her intelligence and determination were finally recognized and valued. She studied education with a passion that inspired her professors, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She made friends who became like sisters to her, creating the supportive family she had always longed for. These relationships taught her what genuine love and encouragement looked like, and slowly, Sarah began to heal from the wounds of her childhood. During her junior year at Michigan State, Sarah met Tom, a kind and gentle man studying engineering. Tom came from a warm, loving family who welcomed Sarah with open arms from the moment they met her. Sitting around their dinner table, listening to the easy conversation and genuine affection they showed one another, Sarah sometimes had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom, overwhelmed by the realization of what she had missed growing up. Tom's family treated her like she had always belonged, asking about her studies, celebrating her successes, and offering comfort during difficult times. After graduation, Sarah began her career as an elementary school teacher in Ann Arbor, about 2 hours away from Grand Rapids. She loved her work, pouring her heart into helping young children learn and grow, often staying late to help struggling students or prepare special lessons. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed, and within a few years, she was recognized as Teacher of the Year for her district. an honor that came with significant recognition and respect in the educational community. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt truly proud of herself and her accomplishments. Meanwhile, David's life had taken a different trajectory. Despite all the advantages and support he had received growing up, he struggled to find his direction after college. He moved from job to job, unable to settle into a career, eventually returning to live with their parents after a series of failed business ventures. The golden child who had once seemed destined for greatness now spent his days playing video games in his childhood bedroom, while Sarah was building a successful career and a beautiful life with Tom. Sarah's parents rarely called to check on her during these years, and when they did, the conversations were brief and superficial. They never asked about her teaching, her students, or her relationship with Tom. Instead, they talked about David's latest plans, always spoken about with an optimism that seemed to ignore his pattern of failure. Sarah learned to expect nothing from these calls, protecting her heart by keeping her expectations low and her important news to herself. 5 years after starting her teaching career, Sarah received notification that she had been selected for a prestigious fellowship program that would allow her to study innovative teaching methods in Finland for a year. The opportunity was incredibly competitive, and Sarah was one of only 10 teachers chosen from across the entire United States. The fellowship came with a significant stipend and would position her for administrative roles when she returned. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude and excitement. When Sarah called to share this incredible news with her parents, expecting that surely this achievement would finally earn their pride and recognition, she was met with the same indifference that had characterized their relationship her entire life. Her mother's response was particularly hurtful. "Well, I suppose someone has to go do those things. I just hope you're not getting too big for your britches. Remember where you came from?" Her father barely acknowledged the news at all, immediately changing the subject to ask if she had talked to David lately because he was having trouble finding work again. That phone call was a turning point for Sarah. Something inside her finally clicked into place. A realization that she had been seeking approval from people who were simply incapable of giving it to her. She understood with a clarity that was both liberating and heartbreaking that her parents' inability to see her worth said nothing about her value as a person and everything about their own limitations and emotional dysfunction. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly free from the weight of their expectations and judgments. The year Sarah spent in Finland was transformative in ways she hadn't anticipated. Surrounded by educators who valued innovation and creativity, she flourished in an environment where her ideas were not just welcomed, but celebrated. She developed groundbreaking methods for helping children with learning differences, work that would later become the foundation for her doctoral dissertation. Most importantly, she gained confidence in her own voice and vision, learning to trust her instincts and value her contributions without needing external validation. When Sarah returned from Finland, she was offered a position as curriculum director for a large school district outside Detroit. The role came with significant responsibility and an impressive salary that more than doubled her previous income. She and Tom bought a beautiful house in a tree-lined neighborhood, and Sarah threw herself into her new role with the same passion and dedication that had always characterized her work. Under her leadership, the district's test scores improved dramatically, and she was invited to speak at educational conferences across the country. It was during this period of professional success that Sarah's parents reached out to her more frequently than they had in years. But their sudden interest wasn't prompted by pride in her achievements or a desire to repair their relationship. Instead, they had heard through relatives about Sarah's success and her new salary, and their motivations became clear when her mother began dropping hints about their financial struggles and David's continued unemployment. The first direct request for money came in the form of a carefully worded email from her mother explaining that David was going through a difficult transition and needed help with his student loans. The email went on to detail their own financial struggles since her father's business had begun declining, and it concluded with a request for Sarah to help family during this challenging time. The email was signed with love, but Sarah could see through the manipulation, recognizing the conditional nature of their affection. When Sarah didn't immediately respond with an offer to help financially, the tone of their communications changed dramatically. Her mother began calling multiple times a day, leaving increasingly aggressive voicemails about Sarah's obligations to family and her selfishness. Her father, who had barely acknowledged her existence for most of her life, suddenly became involved, sending emails about how disappointed he was in the person she had become and how she had forgotten her roots. The most painful part of their campaign wasn't the demands for money, though those stung. It was the way they tried to rewrite history, suddenly claiming they had always supported her education and career, that they had sacrificed so much for her success. Sarah found herself questioning her own memories, wondering if she had imagined or exaggerated the years of neglect and favoritism. This gaslighting was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their manipulation, attempting to make her doubt her own experiences and feelings. David eventually joined their parents' campaign, reaching out to Sarah directly with a mixture of entitlement and resentment that left her breathless. He accused her of being selfish and materialistic, claiming that she owed him support because she had gotten lucky while he had had bad breaks. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why Sarah wouldn't eagerly help the family that had never helped her, as if the years of emotional neglect and favoritism had simply never happened in his mind. The breaking point came when Sarah's parents showed up unannounced at her workplace, causing a scene in front of her colleagues and students. They demanded to speak with her immediately, claiming there was a family emergency that required her attention. When Sarah met with them in her office, it became clear that the emergency was simply their own financial desperation and David's latest failed business venture. They spent an hour berating her for her selfishness and abandonment of family values, raising their voices and causing such a disturbance that security had to escort them from the building. That incident forced Sarah to confront the toxic nature of her relationship with her family once and for all. She realized that they had never loved her for who she was, but had only recently begun to see her as a resource to be exploited. Their sudden interest in her life wasn't based on pride or affection, but on calculation and greed. This understanding, while painful, also brought a strange sense of relief, like finally solving a puzzle that had confounded her for decades. With Tom's support and encouragement, Sarah made the difficult decision to establish firm boundaries with her family. She changed her phone number and made it clear that any further contact would need to be respectful and appropriate. She refused their demands for money while offering to help them explore other options for financial assistance. Most importantly, she stopped seeking their approval and began building a life based on her own values and goals rather than their expectations. The decision to distance herself from her toxic family wasn't easy, and Sarah grieved the loss of the relationship she had always hoped to have with them. She mourned the parents she had needed but never had, and she worked through her feelings of guilt and obligation with a therapist who helped her understand that setting boundaries wasn't cruel but necessary for her own well-being. This process of healing was difficult but ultimately liberating, allowing Sarah to invest her emotional energy in relationships that were mutual and supportive. As Sarah established healthier boundaries, she found that her relationship with Tom's family became even more meaningful. They had always treated her with kindness and respect, but now she was able to receive their love without the constant fear that it would be withdrawn or conditional. She discovered what it felt like to be part of a family where members celebrated each other's successes rather than competing or feeling threatened by them. This experience taught her that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to love and support you consistently. Sarah's career continued to flourish as she focused her energy on her work rather than trying to please people who couldn't be pleased. She completed her doctoral degree while working full-time, wrote a book about innovative teaching methods that became widely adopted in schools across the country, and was eventually offered a position as superintendent of schools for a major metropolitan district. Each achievement brought its own satisfaction, but more importantly, each success reinforced Sarah's understanding of her own worth and capabilities. When Sarah and Tom married 3 years later, the guest list told the story of the family they had chosen rather than the one they had been born into. Tom's relatives filled most of the seats, along with colleagues and friends who had become like family over the years. Sarah's parents were invited but declined to attend, citing their disapproval of what they called Sarah's abandonment of family values. Their absence was notable but not devastating, a sign of how much Sarah had healed and grown beyond their ability to hurt her. The most meaningful moment of Sarah's wedding day came during the reception when Tom's mother stood up to make a toast. With tears in her eyes, she talked about how proud she was to welcome Sarah into their family officially, but emphasized that Sarah had always belonged with them from the moment they met her. She spoke about Sarah's strength, intelligence, and compassion, celebrating all the qualities that Sarah's own parents had never seemed to notice or value. In that moment, surrounded by people who truly loved and appreciated her, Sarah felt complete in a way she never had before. As years passed, Sarah occasionally heard updates about her family through distant relatives, but she maintained her boundaries and refused to be drawn back into their dysfunction. David continued to struggle professionally and personally, moving from one failed venture to another while becoming increasingly bitter about his circumstances. Her parents aged and faced health challenges, but their attempts to reconnect with Sarah were always motivated by need rather than genuine affection or reconciliation. There were moments when Sarah felt pangs of guilt about maintaining her distance, especially when she heard about her parents' health issues or David's continued struggles. But she had learned through therapy and experience that guilt was an inappropriate response to protecting herself from people who had consistently hurt her. She understood that she couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved, and that trying to do so would only damage her own well-being and marriage. 10 years after establishing boundaries with her family, Sarah received word that her father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The news was delivered by a cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, who also mentioned that her father had left his entire estate to David, despite the fact that David had contributed nothing to the family business and had actually cost them money through his failed ventures. Sarah's initial reaction was a familiar sting of rejection, but she was surprised to find that the pain passed quickly, replaced by a sense of closure and confirmation that her decision to distance herself had been correct. Sarah attended her father's funeral not out of obligation or a desire to reconnect with her mother and David, but as a way to pay respects to the complicated man who had shaped her early life in both positive and negative ways. She stood in the back of the church, observing rather than participating, and left immediately after the service without speaking to her mother or brother. Some relatives approached her with questions about why she had stayed away for so long, but Sarah simply smiled politely and redirected the conversation to memories of her father. The funeral was significant for Sarah because it represented the final closing of a chapter that had defined much of her young adult life. She realized that she no longer felt angry at her parents or David, but had moved beyond those emotions to something closer to indifference. They had become strangers to her, people she had once known but who no longer had any power to hurt or disappoint her. This emotional distance wasn't bitter or vengeful, but protective and healthy. Following her father's death, Sarah's mother made several attempts to reestablish contact, sending letters and emails that alternated between guilt-inducing manipulation and seemingly genuine expressions of regret. But Sarah had learned to recognize the patterns of behavior that had characterized their relationship for decades, and she understood that her mother's outreach was motivated more by loneliness and financial insecurity than by genuine remorse or desire for reconciliation. Sarah's response to her mother's attempts at contact was consistent and clear. She was willing to have a relationship based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. But she would not tolerate manipulation, financial demands, or attempts to rewrite their shared history. She made it clear that any future relationship would need to acknowledge the pain of the past and demonstrate real change in behavior, not just words or temporary modifications when convenient. When her mother failed to meet these reasonable requirements and continued to engage in the same manipulative patterns that had characterized their relationship for decades, Sarah made the final decision to cease all contact. This decision wasn't made in anger or spite, but from a place of self-preservation and wisdom gained through years of therapy and personal growth. She understood that some relationships are too toxic to salvage, regardless of biological connections or social expectations. The years that followed were marked by peace and fulfillment in ways that Sarah had never imagined possible during her troubled childhood and young adulthood. She and Tom built a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. They traveled extensively, pursued hobbies and interests together, and created traditions that honored their chosen family, rather than the dysfunctional patterns they had inherited from their families of origin. Sarah's professional success continued to expand as she became a nationally recognized expert in educational innovation and child development. She authored several books, spoke at conferences around the world, and consulted with school districts seeking to implement more effective teaching methods. Her work was deeply fulfilling because it allowed her to help children and families create healthier, more supportive environments for learning and growth. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah discovered that healing from family trauma isn't about getting an apology or acknowledgement from the people who hurt you, but about building a life that reflects your own values and dreams rather than their limitations and dysfunction. She learned that forgiveness doesn't require maintaining relationships with people who continue to cause harm, and that setting boundaries is an act of self-love rather than selfishness. Today, Sarah's story continues to evolve as she approaches her 50s with a sense of gratitude and accomplishment that would have seemed impossible during her painful childhood. She and Tom are considering starting a foundation to help children from dysfunctional families access educational opportunities, a way of turning her difficult experiences into something that can benefit others facing similar challenges. Sarah's journey reminds us that we have the power to break cycles of dysfunction and create the life we deserve, regardless of how we were treated by the people who were supposed to love and support us unconditionally. Her story demonstrates that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't trying to fix broken relationships, but having the wisdom to walk away from them and invest our energy in connections that honor our worth and potential. The most important lesson from Sarah's experience is that our value as human beings isn't determined by how others treat us, especially those who are supposed to love us most. Sometimes the people who are meant to nurture and support us are simply incapable of doing so because of their own limitations, traumas, and dysfunctions. Understanding this truth can be both heartbreaking and liberating, allowing us to stop seeking validation from people who are unable to provide it and instead build lives based on our own understanding of our worth and potential. Sarah's story also illustrates the importance of choosing our family wisely, surrounding ourselves with people who see and appreciate our authentic selves, rather than trying to force us into roles that diminish our value or potential. The family we create through friendship, marriage, and chosen connections can be far more meaningful and supportive than the family we inherit through biology. And there's no shame in prioritizing relationships that nurture our growth over those that consistently cause us pain. As Sarah reflects on her journey from a rejected child to a successful, fulfilled adult, she often thinks about the young women and men who might be going through similar experiences with their families. Her message to them would be simple but profound. You deserve to be loved, valued, and supported for exactly who you are. And if your biological family can't provide that, it's not a reflection of your worth, but of their limitations. You have the power to create the life you've always dreamed of, and sometimes that means having the courage to walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve to be loved. The path forward isn't always easy, and healing from family trauma takes time, patience, and often professional support. But Sarah's story proves that it's possible to overcome even the most painful childhoods and build lives filled with meaning, success, and genuine love. The key is learning to value yourself enough to demand respect from others and having the courage to walk away when that respect isn't forthcoming. If Sarah's story resonates with you, remember that you're not alone in feeling unseen or undervalued by the people who were supposed to love you most. Many of us carry wounds from childhood that continue to affect our adult relationships and self-perception. But healing is possible, and you have the power to write a different ending to your story than the one that seemed predetermined by your early experiences. The journey toward healing and self-acceptance isn't always linear, and there will be days when the pain of family rejection feels overwhelming. But remember that every step you take toward protecting your well-being and building healthier relationships is a victory worth celebrating. You deserve to be surrounded by people who see your value, celebrate your successes, and support you during difficult times. Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is permission to stop trying to earn love from people who are incapable of providing it, and instead focus our energy on relationships that honor our worth and potential. The family you choose can be far more meaningful than the family you inherit, and there's profound healing in surrounding yourself with people who truly see and appreciate who you are. If you're watching this video because you recognize yourself in Sarah's experience, please know that your feelings are valid, your pain matters, and your dreams deserve to be pursued regardless of whether your family supports them. You have the right to protect yourself from toxic relationships, even when those relationships involve people you're supposed to love unconditionally. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is create distance that allows you to heal and grow. Sarah's story continues to unfold with new chapters of success, love, and fulfillment that would have seemed impossible during her darkest moments. She serves as proof that we can overcome even the most painful beginnings and create lives that reflect our highest potential rather than our worst fears. The family that never wanted her lost the privilege of witnessing the incredible woman she became, and their loss became the foundation of her greatest strength. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, especially those who are supposed to love you most. You have the power to write your own story, create your own family, and build a life that honors your dreams rather than their limitations. The journey toward healing and self-acceptance isn't easy, but it's always worth taking. And you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your authentic self rather than trying to diminish your light. Take Sarah's story as encouragement that no matter how painful your beginning, you have the power to create a beautiful middle and ending that reflects your true worth and potential. The family that rejected you missed out on knowing the incredible person you are capable of becoming, and their loss can become the foundation of your greatest triumph.